It is quite clear that at this stage in the pandemic, the not opening of physical schooling is hurting our children more than the virus. I'm Barkha Dutt and you're with the Mojo Story. Our big focus today continues to be on the fact that there is no national consensus on the reopening of schools. While individual states in several parts of the country are moving towards this happening, there also continues to be resistance from a section of parents, even as other parents groups are petitioning the government, different governments, to please open schools. Quite aside from the digital divide, which has thrown millions of Indian school children out of the school system, online classrooms are just not working when it comes to both cognitive and emotional/social skills. Survey after survey is suggesting that children are losing several language abilities, for one, but also just the ability to talk, to socialize, as would be the norm if they were attending physical school. A group of parents have recently petitioned the government here in Delhi, in India's national capital. But why are we failing to make this a priority? That's our special focus on the program today. Let me introduce our guests. I have deliberately not called a doctor to this panel because doctors are now in consensus. Open schools. So this continues to be now something that governments, parents, and schools have to resolve. Joining us on the program is Simran. Simran is here. Simran Khara is here in her capacity as the parent who has been petitioning for the opening of schools. From Ahmedabad today, we are joined by Sanjay. Sanjay is a parent, and we'll get his perspective, whether he shares Simran's perspective or not, we don't know. We are joined by Yamini Aiyar. She's the president of the Center for Policy Research. She was among parents who recently petitioned the Aam Aadmi Party government in Delhi to open schools ASAP, as soon as possible. Giving us a principal's perspective, we're joined on the program by Avnita, who's a principal with Podar Education, a group of schools. Welcome, ma'am, to the program. And also giving a parent's perspective on the program today is Smita Nair, who's a parent from Gurugram in Haryana. So we have three different states actually represented on this program to give you a sense, a national perspective, as it were. Yamini, let me start with you. You were among parents who petitioned the Delhi government recently. You presented a petition that had been signed by 1,600 parents. What do you think is holding this up? Is it a lack of consensus among parents themselves? Is it governments not willing to take a risk? What is it?
I think it's a perfect storm of everything going wrong. It's a combination of the unique way in which Delhi is governed, too many players, therefore everyone passes the buck and no one takes the decision. But what causes that is a combination of elite parents who think that a Zoom room can be a substitute for classrooms. It is political actors who don't want to take a strong decision. And it is an overall environment of consistent fear that has persisted, where voices of those most affected don't find space in actual politics and decision making. A lot of how we've handled policy around COVID has neither been anchored in science, nor has it been anchored in a compassionate state that recognizes the realities of the citizens it's supposed to serve. We saw this in the first lockdown with the migrant workers, and we see it now continuously in the way in which our governments are completely dispassionate and frankly unethically treating the future of India, its students.
Those are strong words, and I'm glad you identify elitism being at the heart of it, and a kind of, dissonance, as it were, in the relationship between the citizen and the state. Speak a little bit more about the essential elitism, which is also, frankly, coming from a section of parents as well as school managers.
Well, let's consider this. A significant proportion of India doesn't actually have access to online schooling. The survey done by Jean Drez and Ritika Khera back in July told us that 8% of rural children in North India and only 24% of urban children had access to online devices in order to be able to participate in online schooling. The ASAR survey that was released in November told us that between last year and this year, despite the fact that there's been a significant drop in incomes, the availability of a smartphone amongst poor households had increased to about 68%. However, less than 1/3 of those students actually had access to a device during school hours, and therefore they were not actually learning. So a large proportion of India's students doesn't even have access to through this so-called online, which we assume is a good enough substitute for being in a classroom. Relatedly, if you look at survey after survey, and Delhi government actually in July did do a survey, and we did find that a large number of parents, mostly coming from low-income households, were supporting the idea of opening schools back in July, when all a significant proportion of elite parents, including the school where my children go to, were hesitating. In November, when schools did open, including primary schools, it was government schools that opened first. And this SOP said only 50% of children in schools, government schools, reported on television, in the newspapers, in conversations I had with them, more than 70% parents were sending their children. They had to move children away. Now, compare that with what was happening in private schools. I can speak for the school that my children go to. They said first there was Diwali holiday, then some consent form was put out. Things took a little while. A lot of parents were genuinely hesitant, and it took a while. And I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. The 9-year-old went to school for 2 days, and then the Supreme Court comes in, again another sign of elitism, and says because of air pollution we have to close schools again. But the vast majority of India's children do not have the luxury of air purifiers, and indoor air pollution affects them even more than going to school. So it is across how we've thought of policy. Even though our representatives do surveys, our elected representatives have done surveys, heard the voices of the poorest, for some reason they are not able to translate that voice into policy action. Good policy is about trade-offs. We are not making these trade-offs right now. Closing schools is causing more harm to the majority than it is saving lives.
And also not just to lower income households, sort of do not have the same access to computing devices. They're also dependent on schools for hot meals, for girls, for sanitary pads, something as basic as that. You're seeing younger girls pushed and forced into marriages, illegal marriages. So there are all kinds of consequences for the vast majority of this country in children not physically going to school. But let me bring in, before I open this up for other parents on this panel, Avnita, giving in a perspective as a principal. Principals I've spoken to did make some attempts in the course of the last year to open schools physically, and then found that parents were not sending children to school. That's one of the most common feedbacks I got from principals. In turn, parents are saying even if one child wants to physically attend school, that school must be open. Ms. Beer, if you can share your perspective, what are some of the problems you've been facing in the reopening of schools?
Yeah, so I'm in Mumbai, and in Mumbai, schools did not reopen at all the whole of last year. And this year, when we were to reopen in January, so the Omicron struck, and so again, schools were shut again till the 15th of February, and then suddenly we were told that schools are going to reopen from the 24th of January. So it's been a lot of back and forth that's happening, and so there's not so much of clarity on whether schools will reopen or not reopen. So we plan, as a school, we plan a lot, but then most of our plans are not able to be implemented. I also feel that, I agree with Yamini that there are too many invested interests, and I think too many stakeholders trying to take a decision with respect to school reopening. And I think the most important decision maker would be the parent and the school. And we don't have to leave it to policy makers. Schools know what is best for their children. They're all, there's fatigue that has happened with the online, learning, not just for children, even for teachers. There's so much of fatigue. We're not able to reach out to the kids. We're not able to understand what are their needs, especially because most of the children in the online classes are not putting on their cameras. So even if they have the devices, we are not able to feel the pulse of our kids. So we don't know what are their needs, what are their learning needs, what are the gaps that we have to fill in. So it's very important that we get the kids back to school and allow schools to take baby steps and gradual steps, because I know that we may have these grandiose plans to get kids back into school, but it's been a very unusual coming back to school. So even when we've reopened the schools, we've had unexpected outcomes. For example, we say we'll get kids in school in 2 shifts, so we'll stagger their coming in, but we find that for any particular shift there are only 10% of the 50% students who are supposed to come in, and then 10% come in, and the next is another 10% come in. So, but over a period of time, we do find that by word of mouth and by, parents are waiting and watching, and they're also seeing how does it pan out. So gradually the numbers have increased. So
Yeah.
that's very encouraging, and I think a
Yeah.
lot
So,
of confidence building has to be done with parents
yeah.
and children.
But I just want to say, not, and I don't mean this in any callous way. We had Dr. Devi Shetty, who runs actually hospitals for children, very clearly on this platform saying schools have to open. Medical professional after medical professional is saying this, and the elephant in the room is this: when schools open, there will be children who will test positive for COVID. There will be. You cannot have a zero COVID environment in a school. So we've got to start communicating that very clearly with the caveats that Omicron doesn't seem to be infecting children in any way that needs to cause anxiety more than any other disease that the child could contract. Sanjay from Ahmedabad, if I can understand your hesitation, I believe that you're not fully convinced about this. Tell us why. Tell us why you're not fully convinced.
Hi, Barkha. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Hi.
Uh, Actually, I am not fully convinced is the right way that you described my opinion. Almost, I have been in touch with almost a lot of parents, in fact, and I have come to know that about 75% of the parents are, in fact, ready to send their children to school. But what about the next 25%? I'll tell you how they feel about it. The rest of the 25% of the parents feel that the government as well as the schools are not doing enough to reassure the parents. That is why I heard a few of the panelists, before me, who said that, uh, who used the term hesitancy, if I'm right. And
Yeah. What kind of assurance would make you feel better? Because see, nobody can guarantee that there will be no COVID cases. There is no force
right,
on earth. There's no force on earth that can guarantee that, right? So
right,
what other sort of assurance,
yeah.
possibly as a parent, Mr. Sanjay Pandit, would you be looking for?
Okay, Barkha, let's see it, chronologically. The first schools were closed down, and incidentally, when the offline schooling started,
Yeah.
the government came out with a stand that they had to
You're showing
the
us something. Let's
children
come out
have,
of these pictures.
yeah,
Yeah. What is this?
yeah.
Letter of
So
undertaking. Yeah. So
this
you
is
were made to sign this? You were made to sign this?
yes, and it reads
इसमें क्या
that
था?
I declare.
इसमें क्या है? हाँ.
Yeah, it says that I, the undersigned of parent of so and so, who is studying in so and so, I declare that I consent to my ward attending the physical school. I declare that my ward is not exhibiting any signs of COVID-19. I declare that my ward will follow all safety and hygiene guidelines, as well as the last point, which is most important. I declare the above consent is provided voluntarily, and that I will not hold the school accountable in the event of any unforeseen incident. So this is the last line, which
Yeah.
is actually, confusing the parents. If the government feels assured that the situation is nice to and right to open the schools, they should
Yeah.
do away with this, right?
I
They
think I
should
think you
actually do
actually
away.
raised a I think you've raised a very interesting point, and I know many arguments that have taken place between I have friends who are parents and their children. In fact, many of them go to boarding school, and in particular, there has been this dispute over who is responsible for the well-being of the child. The school administration saying the families saying the school. In residential schools, this becomes an even more imperative question. So I actually think it's a fair question. I just want a quick response from Avnita as a principal. This hesitation to take responsibility for what happens if somebody tests COVID positive, right? And many things happen because there is still prejudice. Unfortunately, it should have gone by now. Because there is still prejudice around a child contracting COVID. A child can be judged. After all, if grown-ups, they see adults sealing buildings, they've seen the stigmatization of COVID patients. So children can be treated very cruelly. This undertaking almost suggests a kind of, paranoia around COVID. Are these undertaking letters still being signed? I don't know.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we've had to ask parents for consent and to sign these undertakings. And it's coming from the government. It's not coming from the school. It's coming from the municipal corporation saying that you have to get consent and you have to get this undertaking from the parents. So you know what I'm saying is that everybody's trying to pass the buck. I mean, nobody wants to take the responsibility. Even the school, maybe somewhere feels that what if something happens and the school should not be blamed for it. So
Yeah.
I think everybody wants to play safe, and that is the reason. And therefore, I feel that this whole thing of making it optional, asking for consent from parents, let the school decide, because the school will take responsibility if you allow them to be to the freedom to take the steps that they want to take, that they need to take for their kids. I think that trust has to be built. The trust has to be on the school also. The parents trusting the school
Yeah.
and the government trusting the schools.
I just want Yamini Aiyar to come in briefly, and then I'll go to Simran and Smita. The letter of undertaking is an odd letter. I mean, obviously, if the parent is sending her child to school, there is consent in that act. So, what is the legalization? It puts a pressure. It makes the parent possibly think, maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe there's something here. Maybe I'm not being told the full story. It's a very strange thing.
No doubt, it's an odd letter, and in an ideal world, it should be dispensed with. And I think Avanti, before me, hit the nail on the head, saying that this is ultimately about the relationship between schools and parents and building trust. We need to create an environment for that trust building, and therefore, actually, there's an opportunity to do this, because as parents now, we are much more engaged in our child's everyday classroom. We have to sit there and listen. The homework comes onto our WhatsApps, etc. So there's a new relationship that's been built. It can be leveraged. It's imperative for schools and parents to do this together and arrive at a consensus. But one quick point to make here, I have signed many odd consent forms outside of COVID for my child going to school. When they go on a school trip, even when they go, I live in Delhi and our school is in central Delhi, they go less than 5 kilometers away to the railway museum, we have to sign consent. It is always an odd thing, but it's something that we've been doing part and parcel of everything. So I actually gave this letter very little consideration when I had to sign it. What was important was that I trusted the school to do what is in the best interest of my child. That's why I send my child to the school. And I was very clear that it is in the better interest for the psychological, emotional, and learning development of my children to be in school and not be staring at Zoom and mostly being under the table while the Zoom class is going on, because mine are primary school kids.
That's also a good point about this, how many consent letters a parent must have signed in their lifetime. Before I come to Simran and Smita, sorry, Sanjay, very briefly, did you sign this letter, and would you send your children to school or would you not? Where do you stand right now?
Okay, Barkha, I'd like to make a quick clarification. This consent letter is not being asked by the school. It is
Yes,
in
the
fact,
principal clarified that the governments are wanting this. We got that.
yeah.
We got that.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
so I meant to say that the government has at its disposal all the wherewithal to understand and to get at a point where they can tell us this is the point where we are right now with regard to COVID-19. The government
Yeah.
is not coming out. If the government is so sure about it, then they should do away with this thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm not blaming the schools. The schools are doing what they are being asked to do by the government.
Yeah, I get your point, and clearly your hesitation is still there in sending your kids to school. So let me bring in Simran. Simran, you have petitioned the other way around. You want schools to open. And I think parents who are doing this understand enough about this pandemic to know that in that decision, your child could get COVID positive. You do that knowingly. Obviously, you take the precautions, you mask up, you have ventilation, you discuss all of that, but it could still happen, right? And I think without addressing that elephant in the room, we aren't going to get anywhere with this conversation around the reopening of schools. There is no zero COVID in either countries or schools. Simran, go ahead.
So I think Barkha, I think Sanjay is right. There's been so much fear mongering, right? That we are thinking about life in very binary terms, right? Either it's 0% risk or 100% risk, right? And actually, life is always lived in the middle somewhere, right? And I don't think we're going to have a 0% case count ever, right? We're not. We have to learn to live with COVID. It's been 2 years of putting our children last, right? All of the restrictions, all of the restrictions are on the children, right? Everything else is open. Adults are free to take flights. Kids are frankly free to take flights, go to hotels, go to malls, go to restaurants, except go to school, right? So, till when is this going to continue? Everybody else has managed to lobby, showcase why it's the right thing for the economy or for some employment angle, why the spa should open, why the mall should open, why the restaurant should open, except that the kids have not had an organized voice. And that is frankly why I have gotten together with other like minded parents and we've started petitioning because somebody has to come out and be the voice for the children, right? What baffles me is the lack of transparency in decision making. So, if all the experts, all the top doctors of our country and every other country believe this is safe, then why are we not either opening the schools or objectively sharing what is the criteria? Why does India have a unique answer? Out of all the countries in the world, why is India so special and so unique that yahi pe we must not open schools? And if that is so, then explain that logic, explain that decision making. I think what we're doing today is we're being very careless, right? We're being very careless with the future of little children simply because they're not a vote bank, simply because the child offers you no commercial revenue, simply because there's no GST or tax angle on the kids. It's just that, therefore, every DDMA meeting, they just get passed. You know, Barkha, think about it, right? In the graded response action plan, the default is school shut. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
Where are we putting our kids in our priority list as the government, right? Whether it is the LG or it's the DDMA or the central government or the state government, whoever. It's not about just blaming one aspect, right? But I think fundamentally we are failing the children because we are not coming out and clearly communicating that this is our philosophy. This is what we know now about COVID. This is what we know about COVID in children. This is what we know about Omicron. And hence, this is the plan forward. I think that's what we're looking forward to know now. What is the plan forward, right? Because it just can't continue like this. I have a 5-year-old. She's been to school for 2 days in the last 2 years. Think about how she feels. Her mom walks out to work. Her dad goes to work. She sits at home with a maid. Think about how she feels. Think about how I feel as a mother with what I'm having to sort of, this is all I can do. All I can do is petition. But there's no voices and we get no response. Zero. We get silence. Right? And
Yeah.
everybody's just managing the system, Barkha, right? So all we're doing is we're cutting the syllabus because online is not effective. So the kids are not learning. So let's just chop the syllabus. Kids are not going to come in for offline exams. So let's scrap the exam. Let's just pass them to the next class. The reality is kids are behind in academics. Kids are behind in social development. Kids are behind in physical development. Of course, their future prospects are getting impacted. Let's not be delusional here. Their future prospects are getting impacted. And
Yeah.
and look, it's going to be a journey, right? It's going to be a slide path. You can't tomorrow morning, and I agree with Avnita, you can't just break it to the school saying Monday se kholte hain. There will be a slide path. There will be a set of people who will need more comfort. They may need more cajoling. So maybe they need the online path. There's a set of people like me. I'm a working mom. I live in a nuclear family. I absolutely need to send my child 5 days a week. Allow me the option to do that. Let everybody have that option. Today I can decide if I want to go to the mall. Right? I don't have to go to the mall.
Yeah,
I can
no,
just
I hear you. I hear you. And I think, as Yamini pointed out in the beginning, I mean, we are still having this conversation because we have a set of options or choices. There are people in the vast majority of our country, their children do not have a choice. They're desperate to get their children into school. So the entire debate actually is a privileged, is one of privilege for us, people like us, as they say. Let me bring in Smita Nair, another parent who, like Sanjay, is not fully convinced. Smita, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I would like to say like there are a lot many safety guidelines being issued by the Supreme Court regarding the transport safety or the school safety for the children. Till date, those school have not maintained those safety guidelines. So how I am not assured that the school are going to give COVID safety or Omicron safety guidelines to the children, right? And we are not like we are not confident of sending the kids to school. That's because they have not maintained the safety guidelines in the past.
Can can
There are a lot many.
can you give an example once again, Smita? Can you give an example of what you mean specifically about a guideline that has in fact been flouted?
Yeah, there are a lot many safety guidelines issued by the Supreme Court regarding the transportation safety guidelines and the safety of children in the school premises, right? So the school is not maintaining that those safety guidelines. So we parent are not sure like whether the school is going to maintain the COVID safety or the Omicron safety guidelines for our kids. That's why I am not agree with the school reopening, because and they are see the school is not taking any responsibility and the ministry are also not taking any responsibility. So I just want to know, like if 50 people are only allowed for the marriage celebration, and in school more than 500 people, no, more than 500 students are allowed in school, in our school. So it how they are accommodating 500 students in a school, more than 500 in a school.
Okay, I'm seeing lots of hands go up. Let me go to Yamini, but with just one sort of ironic paradox that we have not cancelled elections, right? Just to make this point, this year, unlike the last year, we have curtailed rallies. But by the way, we have not campaigning is not completely forbidden. Campaigning, some of the restrictions have been eased, and when people show up to vote, you are going to see them in the hundreds, if not the thousands. And there's just something so egregious about the fact that polling booths will be open but schools are closed. Also, ma'am, with respect, our understanding of what's the safety guideline has also changed. So, for example, in the first wave, we thought that surfaces could spread COVID, and you had all this contactless delivery, etc. None of this is essential. And this is where I fault different governments, that there just hasn't been clear science-based messaging that we now know more. Certain things are fine. It's okay to pick up a menu. It's okay to touch a table. You don't need to keep sanitizing your hand. So our messaging hasn't kept pace. But Yamini, I think what Smita is referring to is school buses. This was a major fault line of debate among lots of parents and principals. Go ahead.
So a few things. Look, let's be clear that apart from the rather odd stopping and fining you when you're driving on your own for not wearing a mask, COVID guidelines, even just simple masking, have not been followed in any aspects of our economy. I have had multiple fights, whether I go to a market or I go to an airport, I'm sitting on a plane, I'm sitting on a train with people just to put their mask up on their nose. But we're not stopping economic activity on the basis of the failure of our ability to follow basic guidelines. That is something that perhaps we should do, but holding schools to opening to ransom on that is a little unfair given the rest of the decision making that we have done. As far as the actual following of COVID protocols, parents absolutely, myself included, and all the parents here have a right to ask the school, what are you doing to ensure the safety of my child? Again, there, I think the trust building between school and parent has to be built. For the few schools that have been open across the city of Delhi at any rate throughout the pandemic, the one thing that has worked effectively is that schools and parents have negotiated and found ways to figure out what is the most effective and appropriate way to ensure that protocols are followed, and masking, ventilation, all those protocols have been put into place. Protocols have changed, as you say. Governments, it's incumbent on them to raise awareness around that. ICMR has very clearly said that even masking is not necessary for children up until the age of 12. So governments themselves are seeing change and are responding to that change. Perhaps they haven't done a good enough job of raising awareness, but as parents, it's our responsibility too to make ourselves aware of the changing dynamics around COVID. It is an evolving disease. We are learning as we go. So we should also take some onus on not getting stuck in the past. On issues like transportation, many schools have, in fact, DTC buses contracts also have broken down over these last 2 years. That there is a negotiation taking place around how to figure out that transportation. Let it be, as Avnita has said, a matter to be discussed between schools and parents. It could be devolved, as it should be, to the panchayat level, to the ward level, to the district level, to allow for sensible decision making to take place so that you avoid the overcrowding and allow movement. Don't forget, the SOPs still only mandate 50% students in the classroom. It's something I don't agree with, but that's what the SOPs say. So you will not have overcrowding. Let's be confident.
Yeah, in fact, with so many parents hesitant, you will probably have undercrowding, which is what Avnita was speaking to. Avnita, if you want to come in here, you've heard the hesitant parents. So if you want to address that community or that section of the parent community.
Yeah, I think, apart from the fact that, children have not been to school and online is not as effective, and we need to have the interface between teacher and the taught. I think the other big danger that I see is that the more we prolong reopening of school, the more difficult it is going to be for the children and even for parents to get into that routine of, getting up in the morning, wearing your uniform and coming to school. We find that's a very big challenge now. There are children who don't want to, they want to attend their school in their pajamas and they don't want to come to school. So I think that danger of, a prolonging, this whole exercise of studying from home, and not getting into the discipline of, following a routine, that's a very big danger. That's a big threat that we're looking at. It's going to impact our children very significantly. The other thing is they do not want to write offline exams or evaluation, because they now got used to doing online tests and online examinations, which are not, so the validity of those exams is very, very, suspect. So a whole lot of other factors also that are at play, which are disturbing us as educators.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is allow, we need flexibility. We need schools to be given that kind of freedom to decide for themselves how to recalibrate their plans, because the plans that we created, initially, they didn't work, because it didn't pan out the way we thought it would, when schools actually
and
opened.
and you
Now
also
what we
need
have to do-
you also
yeah,
need some policy consistency. I mean, obviously if
yes,
there's an emergency it's different, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that a school can't plan in any way if there's no policy consistency. The World Health Organization has repeatedly urged to keep schools open. Sanjay, if I can come back to you, what would you like to hear? The letter of undertaking is a very important point of conversation you brought up, that it amplifies your fear, and we hear you. What else? What other assurance would you need? Because like I said, no one can offer guarantees against COVID. All you have to do is hear the science, listen to the science, and I agree the messaging is confused. For example, governments still close public parks. It's the one safe area, open spaces, and you see this happening repeatedly. So there is confused messaging from governments. But as Yamini said, this is the future of our children. So we all have to be involved, even if the government isn't getting this messaging spot on. Sanjay.
Barkha ji, without any doubt, I do agree that overall development of the children are taking a massive hit, a massive hit. My child, when he last went to school, he was in class sixth, and most probably when he'll be going to the school next, in say March or April next year, he'll be in class ninth. So those 2 years he has lost the development of the kind that he would have gone to school and would have mixed with friends, with teachers, with offline classes. So all in all, I think, as I told you before, the government should come out with some good policy making. And as I told you earlier also, the government has the wherewithal to arrive at
But
a decision.
Sanjay, there's a great question on the screen. If we can bring it up again, that it's not as if the home environment or whatever else your child is doing is assuring or guaranteeing against COVID, right? And that's the question from Dr. Gowri here. Can we assume that your child is safe at home? I mean, there is no, unless you're never going to come out of a tunnel, there is no guarantee anymore for the world, not just for India, right? So, did I hear you correctly? You're not planning to send your children to school this year? You said next year?
I don't see the government coming out with a fixed kind of policy.
So your children would not have gone to school for 3 years then? 3 years, physically, I mean.
2 years, ma'am. 2 years, ma'am. 2 years.
Okay. Simran,
Seventh
last
and
word
eighth.
to you. Got it. Simran, last word to you. Got to
You're
close. Yeah.
absolutely right, but even if you live in a tunnel, right? Like my 5-year-old was at home and she was home for close to 700 days straight, and she still got COVID. And she's not unique in this, right? Like about 80% of the children in Delhi have antibodies. They've had COVID, so we've locked them up. We have created mental health issues in them. We have given them a learning loss. What have we achieved with this, right? And it's time we just spoke about our learnings. I think when the pandemic started, it was extremely scary. But with what we know now, we do need to come up with a strategy to open. Like, this is not a discussion in terms of that should we open or not. I think the question should be, how do we open soon, and how do we provide the fullest experience possible? Not 2 hours in a day, not twice a week, but how do we provide a fullest experience possible? Because we've lost so much.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that is the thought we must close with today, that the discussion can no longer be when to open schools, but how to open them soonest. What should be the class strength? How do you create a hybrid model if hybrid is the first step towards reopening? How do you address transportation issues? Schools that are privileged enough to have open spaces, how do you optimize the use of open spaces? How do you make it a rule to keep windows open in classrooms? These are small basic things that we now know so much about that can create a safe environment. And please, I think as Yamini said at the beginning of the program, and so many of you have amplified, that this should be the last thing that is opening. Just feels criminal. We'll have to leave it there to Simran, Smita, Sanjay, Yamini, and Avnita. Thank you. If you're a parent watching this program, make your voice heard. This is a debate that needs to be getting much more media time than it's getting. We're going to do our bit on that. Thank you to our panel, and we'll have all of you back and others back to keep this debate alive. And the debate will not be should schools open, but how to best open them in a way that is almost an emergency now. It is an emergency, in fact. Thank you for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.